What is up, guys? I got a question for you. What if you were to wake up in a world where your strong feelings and negative thoughts were to breed monsters from another world? That's right. In this video today, we're going to be covering a brand new series to Shonen Jump called Shadow Eliminators. As of the making of this video, it's like 4 chapters out, but I just got into making these. So in this video today, we're going to be covering chapters 1 and 2. And then the next one, we're going to do 3 and 4. And then as of this video, the next chapter will be out in, I think, 4 to 5 days. So, and then we're going to be doing reviews of said chapters on a weekly basis. So, as most reviews go, we're going to be introducing one of the first people in the chapter who I believe is going to be a co-protagonist of the series, Yayoi Asakaze. Now, I know I'm probably going to be butchering the first name, or the whole name in general, but that is one of the first characters we're introduced to at Moribo High. Asakaze, as just a general character from what you can see in the first chapter, is he's by the textbook. He believes in fairness and justice, and we're going to be a little bit later, I'm going to go into how his personality affects him in school. So when the chapter opens, he's standing by the gate of the school. He has his little clipboard, and you see another student walk up to the gate. You see him counting down, and then should the gate shut? And he's asking him like, "Hey, this could ruin my grades. This could ruin, hurt my attendance in school." And he said, and he goes, "Upperclassmen should be on time." And the reason that he has this type of personality is because he had an idol in his grandfather when he was younger, who was a policeman. So he was praised when he was younger for helping people at any opportunity that he could. And it's at this point during this conversation with another student is when our second, or I guess our MC or other co-protagonist of the series, when makes his grand entrance, when he leaps, puts his foot on the gate and jumps into the schoolyard, assuming that he has to be the first one there because no one is around. Koromori transferred to Maribo High School to quote-unquote train. So it's here we get a little flashback on the day that he was transferring, where he showed up in a sweatsuit, to which Asakaze was grilling into him about the school dress code, right? And it's at this point where we cut back to him in the middle of the schoolyard, and he's wet. He's noticeably wet. And Asakaze asks him, "Why are you wet?" And then you get another cut back to where he just jumped to help some lady grab what looks like a handkerchief as it's falling towards a river. And it's at this point in the story where we start to learn all the information about each character as the plot progresses. So far what we've learned is Asakaze believes in fairness and justice. And not only that, he also believes in we must correct ourselves and govern ourselves in order to be correct. And as we get more introduced to Koromori, he gets questioned by Asakaze about his dress. Going back to that because he wears earrings on both ears that are in the shape of a bow tie, and he has what appears to be a tattoo on his neck. Now, when asked by Asakaze about his tattoo, he says that it is a mark which he bears for a noble reason. Now, it's at this point in the story, we have no idea what that noble reason is. But as we find out later on in the chapter, kind of get an idea as to what that noble reason is. Because it's here, when Asakaze asks about his earrings, he says that he wears them for a personal reason, aside from his tattoo being a noble mark. Now, at this point in the story, when they're having this conversation, Koromori jumps up into a tree and is helping what seems to be a teacher, Fuyuno-sensei. And he says that he's grabbing her purse from the tree. So Asakaze asks Fuyuno-sensei, like, "Hey, what's going on? Like, what is he doing?" And she obviously confirms, like, "He's grabbing my purse." So after he jumps down from the tree and gives Fuyuna Sensei her purse, he tells Asakaze that he does not believe that he's wrong. However, he believes to avoid regret in his life that he has to walk his path on his own, and that Asakaze isn't wrong in the fact that, yeah, people should look out for each other. And it's at this point when you see this black ball or black mass of some sort appear, and you see that Kuromori has a thought to himself, wondering if this is a hollow. And after Kuromori jets off to investigate, that's when we learn that Asakaze becomes very suspicious of Kuromori. Now, as Kuromori is running off, Asakaze decides to follow him. So he's walking through the hallway, and then in the background of the panel in the manga, you can see in a room a little talisman or a seal of some sort being slapped on the wall. And then that's when you see Asakaze think to himself, oh, he's in the art room. So he decides to investigate. Naturally, like, who wouldn't be curious? Like, what is going on in there? So he walks through the door, and is what seems to be he's almost flabbergasted by what he's seeing. And to Kuromori's surprise, he's even more confused, because he's like, how did you slip past the human warding? Because obviously that seal was meant to be put in place to keep humans out and away from harm, while Kuromori is dealing with the threat of whatever this beast or monster may be. At this point, Asakaze asks Kuromori, like, hey, what are you doing to that girl? Because he doesn't understand exactly what's going on. He doesn't understand what Kuromori is doing. He thinks that he is doing something to this girl for her to be in this position that she's in. Out of nowhere, Kuromori's grandma just pops out. And Asakaze, being that the character he is so far, he tells his grandmother that it is a den full of evil spirits, and it is too dangerous for her to be there. And it's here, in this conversation between Asakaze and Kuromori's grandmother, she reveals that this creature is a otherworldly hollow. And she states that it is opened up in the material plane. And aside from hollows, they are also known as threads. Now you might be asking yourself, well, what exactly is a thread? Well, obviously, from what we know and what we can deduce, it is an otherworldly creature that has materialized on our plane. And what they do, as stated in this context of this story, is they wrap themselves around the darkness or shadows of people's hearts. And once these threads or hollows wrap themselves around the shadow of people's hearts, then they can take form if they are not dealt with in a quickly manner. Now, what happens is they can transform. So in essence, kind of like a transformation. And at this point in the story, this is where we see Kuromori pull out what looks like an old kite reel. It's like this little thing, it's about, say about yay long. It has a handle, and it's got what looks like a bike pedal. So in my head, I automatically thought that it was a kite reel because of the way he says binding, and it spins the thread around the reel. So, like I said, honestly, my mind cut immediately to kite reel. And here we find out that Kuromori's grandmother only appeared because he forgot the reel. And it's here where his grandmother states that hollows are going to be opening very often, and it's only one part of the calamity. What is the calamity? Well, we have yet to find that out, but obviously with whatever is going on with this calamity, this is the reason why that these threads, hollows, are taking form and are opening up the way that they are. This is also where his grandmother states that Maribo City is becoming a beacon for these threads or hollows to open up. Now, as we continue in the story after this conversation between the three of them, Asakaze does end up passing out. When he does wake up, he's sitting or laying in the lap of Kuromori. It's here where Asakaze is surprised and asked where he is. At this point, his grandmother reveals that they're in her shop or her house that has a shady history. This is where I believe that a friendship between the two essential co-protagonists, I feel that a friendship is going to blossom. Because you have Asakaze, who believes in fairness and justice. By the book's standards, to be correct. doing his normal daily routine. And then all of a sudden you get this new transfer student who he has no idea who he is, why he's there, and begins to question him, his motives, and so on and so forth. And then he runs off. So as curious as he is and as suspicious as he is of Koromori, he begins to follow him. And then all of a sudden, brand new world that you had no idea existed, that could be that big of a danger. So as we see the seeds, essentially, of a brand new friendship, Koromori and Asakaze, besties, right? And it's at this point, Asakaze asks his grandmother that if the actions of Koromori were to ever go over the line, if he could deliver a swift, rectifying chop. Because after that, she agrees. And what does he do? He delivers a rectifying chop. Now, I thought that was super hilarious. And then after he delivers this rectifying chop, he then proceeds to ask them, hey, what's going on with the girl? And this is where he gets the response of, don't worry about it, she's being taken care of by an expert. It's at this point that Asakaze tells Koromori that he believes him. These creatures exist, but he finds it vexing that they do, but then proceeds to say that it has nothing to do with him because he's just a regular civilian, a regular student. What can he do about it? And it's at this point in the story, Asakaze has a flashback to his grandfather. He begins to question himself. He begins to ponder. And then you get little images of a little young Koromori looking up to his grandfather. And you get the backstory on what happened to his grandfather. Because obviously we know from the beginning of the chapter that Asakaze really looked up to his grandfather as a role model, as an idol. And this is where we find out that his grandfather lost his life from trying to protect an elementary student from getting hit by a car. And from the life that his grandfather lived as just a simple policeman is what inspired Asakaze to believe in what he believes in. So much is so that his beliefs donned him a nickname. At school, he's known as the Justice Man because he's so just, he's so fair. He believes in the rules, he's strict. He knows everybody's name, he knows who everyone is because he's in the Public Morals Committee. So he feels it is his job to uphold the standard, to make sure everyone's following the rules, no matter what class you were in, upperclassmen, lowerclassmen. It doesn't matter. He believes it's his job, it's his duty in that role to make sure everyone's following the rules. And then he ends up leaving. And on his brisk stroll, as he's contemplating, flashing back to his memories of his grandfather, he runs into a girl who appears to be sweating and or crying, or both. And he asks her, what's wrong? It's actually one of the girls who pulled the prank on Fuyuna Sensei. She said that her and her friend were going to apologize for pulling the prank because they thought it was a joke. But when they went to apologize, she said that something felt weird, like something unseen was there. And it's at this point it cuts to what looks like a garage with Fuyuna Sensei holding this other girl who was pulling the prank by her neck. Here you could see that a thread was attached. It's here where Asakaze is thinking, do I step in, essentially? And as he's sitting there, Koromori just pops out of nowhere. And then he says to him, I thought you said that this has nothing to do with you, yet here you are, trying to help all on your own. At this point that Koromori begins to explain the appearance of the thread that's attached to Fuyuna Sensei. And he states that this thread has transformed into what is known as a kasane, and that the black mask on her face is proof and confirmation of that. And here he explains that they fester in humans who don't have any resistance to it, and a power that they never asked for goes berserk of its own accord. So Asakaze asks Koromori, Why don't you hesitate? And it's here we find out that the reason why Koromori doesn't hesitate is because he couldn't protect the one person that he was supposed to protect, and he couldn't stop the one person that he was supposed to stop. That by living his life by this, he believes that this is his atonement. And even though he thinks this is childish, it is his decision to live his life the way that he is. And that no matter what, he's never going to forgive himself. And it's at this point when a handcuff appears on his arm. Shocked, Asakaze says, "Handcuffs," wondering where these handcuffs are coming from. And as these handcuffs appears, Koromori says, "If I am to fulfill my purpose, then I have no time to hesitate." And he dashes forward, and he lands on the wall of the garage. And as he sits there, perched up against the wall of the garage, he states, "Unmasking Jutsu." And then behind him appears a fully formed Kasane. And this Kasane is also bound by a handcuff. So you can make the link that he could have possibly made like some sort of contract of some sort, or maybe he caught and bound a thread or a Kasane into servitude of some sort, or like a contract, or a binding vow like in JJK, or a contract with a devil like in Chainsaw Man. We simply don't know yet, but it's going to be interesting to see the development here, because as he's perched on this ledge, you can fully see handcuffed on one hand, and then another handcuff that leads to the Kasane. And then Koromori jumps into action with a blade coming out of one of his arms. And it's here we realize that his blade can only harm Kasane. It cannot harm humans. And he succeeds in successfully slaying this Kasane and freeing Fuyuna Sensei from the threads. Fight's over, girl saved. And then the following day at school, Koromori decides, like, hey, I'm gonna start a club. So what do you see? You see him trying to start a club, and then you see what seems to be like a flyer for like an extracurricular activity or a club for his extracurricular activities. And then the chapter ends. So by the end of chapter 1, we're introduced to the two, what I believe is going to be co-protagonists, Koromori and Asakaze. We learn their backstories, or at least the backstory of inspiration from Asakaze, and a little bit peeking behind the curtain into the beliefs of Koromori. We're also introduced to the enemies and their basic forms, hollows or threads. They can latch themselves onto and or layer onto people who have strong passions and negative thoughts. Also referred to as shadows of the hearts, and these are what they tend to latch onto. And if they are not taken care of or bound in a certain amount of time, then the Kasanes take form. And another thing that we learn is that threads can be bound by the little kite reel tool of some sort. I have not learned a name for it yet, but they can be bound. But once they fully transform into a Kasane, they cannot. They must be slayed. So that's it. That's the end of chapter 1. Our basic introductions into the character, the direction of the plot, the belief systems so far of the two main co-protagonists. So now, with that being said, now we're going to jump into chapter 2. Chapter 2 picks up basically the same place that you leave off in chapter 1, where Asakaze and Koromori are having a conversation about the recruitment flyers that you saw at the end of chapter 1. Basically, they're having a conversation of being an eliminator basically falls under the category of being an independent activity. It's at this point in the conversation, as they're attempting to post these bulletins around their school, Asakaze asks Koromori if they can actually really help. And as they're having this conversation about whether or not they can really help, as they're posting their flyers around the school, Koromori informs Asakaze that a lot of paranormal and urban legend occurrences are actually linked to the Kasane and the other world. And as they're trying to post one of their flyers on one of the bulletin boards, this is when we're introduced to one of the side characters, the president of the drama club. Now, why is that important? Well, not only is he the president of the drama club, he also happens to be one of the more popular kids in school. Everyone knows who he is, especially the girls. And here we are introduced to Akio Watase. Now it seems that Asakaze makes it a point that he's popular, that he's from Class 2A, that he's the president of the drama club, which he also happens to be posting a flyer, which I'm assuming is for the drama club, because it's a giant bulletin board for all of the extracurricular activities in the school clubs. Here we find out that, as I stated, all of the girls are in love with him, and one of the major factors of why all the girls are in love with him is because one of them states, "I saw you in that TV show." So here we can assume he's a popular kid in school, he was a TV star, and he's the president of the drama club. It's here that Asakaze says that Akio is a nexus of disturbance through no fault of his own. Obviously being that he's so popular with the ladies, always causing a disturbance. So, all the ladies are just rushing him to get his attention, just to be around him in his presence. And it's here where they're trying just to simply post their flyer on the bulletin that Akio is rushed by all the girls, so they're unable to do so. So he ends up just posting it on his locker instead, Kuromori. And it's here that we find out that Kuromori actually stashes the 7 otherworldly tools in his locker, and that he also has the key to the locker just below his, so he ends up giving the key to Asakaze. And then Kuromori tells Asakaze, "Here, now you can be the locker minister and you can brag about it too." After this little brief conversation, we're shown an image of what seems to be the two of them talking again on top of the roof of the school. And at this point, Akio again is walking up to have a conversation with the two of them. And as he does, he actually recognizes Asakaze only because he remembers his nickname, the Justice Man. In this conversation, Asakaze openly admits the only reason why he knows him is because of how popular he is, and that he's heard about him before he even came to the school. And then after the conversation is over, Kuromori informs Asakaze that Akio has layers of shadows over his heart, but he can't see them because they're probably holed up inside of him. But after telling him that Akio has shadows laying over him, Kuromori tells him that in order for them to take form, it needs a trigger to give birth to a Kasane. And it's at this point in the story where it cuts to Akio seems to be acting on some sort of stage, or possibly even a TV show. He begins to explain that he lives his life solely based on expectations, and that he needs to meet everyone's expectations. He also states that he was good at everything before, but once he was actually introduced into theater, that's what really changed his life. It's here, what seems to be like backstage, Akio is actually having a conversation with his father. And what seems to be like he'll never be able to live up to his father's expectations. And it's this realization, this is Akio's trigger to giving birth to his Kasane. Back to our two main characters. And Kuro, which I'm calling Kuromori for short, tells Asakaze, that he is going to take care of Akio. And he runs off. So Asa is sitting there, wondering to himself, how can I really help? He's just a regular person. Like, he'd had these questions before. How can I actually help? And at this point, he's thinking to himself, when the locker begins to shake. So he opens it, and out comes what looks like a mini house. After the house essentially presented itself in front of Asa, he grabs it onto the house and then it whooshes him away. It essentially leading him to the battlefield. It winds up leading him into the gym, which is where our current situation is currently unfolding between Akio and Kuro. And as the house leads Asa into the gym, he begins to take notice of his surroundings in the gym and notices that it's destroyed. So basically, our boy is big mad, telling him like, hey, can you not destroy our gym? And suddenly the house speaks by stating, come on in. After speaking those words, come on in, the three of them, Asa, Kuro, and Akio, who is currently a Kasane, gets sucked into the house, or what seems to be like being sucked into the house, but it's actually a barrier of some sort. And it's here, while this is happening, we get a sidebar from Kuro's grandma giving us a little bit of a rundown of what the house is. Now, to me, it seems like the house is sentient because of the way that his grandma describes it. So the name is called the Wandering House. But there's a twist to said Wandering House. It does not get along with other Eliminators. So with that fact being known, that is why I believe it is somewhat sentient. And then the grandma states, if someone who has power tries to use it, then it does nothing. But that's the twist. Because it essentially guides the weak. And after this little sidebar of information from Kuro's grandma, we cut back to the fight in the gym taking place between Kuro and Kasane Akio. And after he realizes, like, hey, we're in a barrier, he tells Asa, hey, don't close the barrier, so that way I can slay this Kasane without holding back. He proceeds to do just exactly that. So after the battle is finally over and the barrier is closed by the Wandering House, that's when they realize that the barrier actually repaired all of the damage that was previously done to the gym prior to the barrier being opened. And it's here Asa begins to explain to Kuro how he got to the gym and the Wandering House. And then finally, Akio begins to wake up. He states that he can't exactly remember what happened, but it felt like whatever he did was bad. And then this is where you kind of infer the expectations were the trigger to his Kasane awakening, which essentially it was. But it was because he felt like he wasn't living up to his father's expectations. We begin to understand that Asa does admire Akio because of what he does. So after the battle ensued, and Akio has woken up, he then begins to ask them, like, hey, what are your guys' names? And this is where they show him the flyer, and they state, this is who we are. And on the flyer, it says, Shadow Eliminators. So with that, guys, that is a complete wrap of Chapter 2 of Shadow Eliminators. Here in the chapter, we're introduced to a side character and a little bit more on how exactly that these otherworldly creatures interact with the material plane, how exactly they're triggered, how they can be layering over somebody, but even Eliminators can't see them if they're holed up inside of them. Here we're also introduced to one of the 7 tools that Kuromori has stashed in his locker. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm kind of excited to see the rest of them, because if one of them is a sentient wandering house that can just pop and open a barrier that can, essentially repair an area after it's been severely damaged and can speak, I'm kind of interested in to see exactly how this all plays out. Not to mention the fact that Kuromori being handcuffed and bound to a Kasane, his arm turns into a literal blade. Like, this series so far to me is kind of exciting. Now, how exciting do I think this series is? Well, I have a little bit of a controversial opinion, guys. And what do you mean by controversial? What could be more controversial than a story that literally just started and is only 4 chapters in? Well, I tend not to hold hopes for a story unless it gets to at least 10 chapters. Because by 10 chapters, then we start to understand, like, hey, maybe this story does have a good basis to continue, or it's interesting enough for everyone to read it, like Kagurabachi. Kagurabachi was a series that started and apparently was memed into, existence. Well, not memed into existence, but it was basically an internet meme that blew up, which, if I'm being all, like, whole and totally honest, I never saw. I was just on the Shonen Jump app one day and they were like, hey, this is a new series. Do you want to check it out? So I clicked on it and that's when I started reading it. Anyway, getting back to my controversial opinion, I believe that if this story, Shadow Eliminators, is successful in getting past 10 chapters and has enough story, plot, theme, interesting characters, interesting power system, things of that nature to grasp people in and gravitate people to the story, how it is built, I believe that this story is a good replacement for Jujutsu Kaisen once Jujutsu Kaisen reaches its conclusion of its manga run. Obviously, with the revelation from Jump Festa 24, we know that JJK will not be at the Jump Festa 25. So at some point this year, that story is going to end. And if I'm being honest, if Shadow Eliminators does fairly well, I believe that Shadow Eliminators could be a good stone to put in place of JJK once it's done. With a gripping story of living in a world where otherworldly beings can latch onto your heart. If your emotions and your passions are strong enough, if your thoughts are negative enough, and you have a trigger, you can give birth to a scary, otherworldly beast that only certain people can slay. Are we drawing conclusions here? Think about it. A Kasane is no different than a cursed spirit. The only minor difference that I can see between a Kasane and a cursed spirit is how they form. Or Shadow Eliminators, or just Eliminators, are no different than Jujutsu sorcerers, being that a sorcerer has to exorcise a cursed spirit, or an Eliminator slays a Kasane. Now, only key differences that I can see so far is Kasane are born from humans, and are attached to humans, and cursed spirits are just spirits all on their own. The only kind of one difference that I can see between Shadow Eliminators and Jujutsu Kaisen, but who knows? Only time will tell if this story does have a success or not. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you like my content, maybe consider giving me a like, a follow. I'd much appreciate it.